Hey everybody. Well, this is like part 2 of my mushroom video because I got cut off, but I don't know if I'll make it a separate video or somehow incorporate the two. But anyway, I was talking about mushroom cults and how they relate to our modern day use of mushrooms and what we can learn from their usage of them. Unfortunately, the hardest part is to distinguish, what types of mushrooms they were using, at what levels, and whether they were psychedelic or, say, a dissociative, or a more like a delirious type, like why is it evading me, like the fly agaric, or wait, no, that's the poison. Anyway, Amanita muscaria. So most people who were taking the psilocybin mushrooms, it's obviously they revered them enough to put them in stone and to inscribe these things all over their, buildings, to make statues, totems, necklaces. The point is that this mushroom was very important to them. Now, these are cultures that predated religion, as far as we know it, that formed religion, and many of these cultures revered the mushroom. Now, it's only today, when science can finally correlate the mystical or spiritual experience with the psychedelic experience, that we can finally start to see where the roots of religion really come from. And this is significant to me, personally. I mean, I've always known this, but I've always, only recently, when I was looking at the studies that they've been doing at Johns Hopkins, which is, they have psychedelic research going on there with psilocybin, and they have got the permits to do it. So there's a lot of info out there now that, the scientific community can scoff all they want, but if Johns Hopkins is doing it, what are you going to say? And the participants have varying, they're taking participants that don't have any previous mystical or psychedelic experience, but some of them have been done with people who have had mystical experiences, and they rank it right up there in the same realm. So my point here is that under an MRI, they found that the brain is active in the same areas, the hemispheres, not the hemispheres, but the components of the now and the later, or the part that's chatter, 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 and the part that's living in the moment. Bring those together, just like happens in meditation and in prayer and in intense mystical experiences. So very well, a psychedelic is a mystical, induced mystical experience through not endogenous chemicals, but natural compounds, which simulate serotonin. Now, this is very significant to me because if these cults revered the mushroom so much, and these are the people who, religion stemmed from, it's obvious that it would be hard to differentiate a religious experience or meeting God or a prophet from an actual psychedelic experience. But there's another line of viewing which says that perhaps they're one and the same, that perhaps psychedelics allow us to communicate with that ether. But in the realm of grounded, what we know as far as the scientific evidence shows that these people were consuming these things, and that these things triggered the part of the brain that gives you a mystical experience. Therefore, and I was learning about, the idea that Phosphorus and Hesperus, which are the morning and the evening stars, and those were the names given to the morning and evening star. A lot of people might know that Lucifer is derived from Venus. Venus meant, Lucifer, the bringer of wisdom, the light bringer, light bearer, whatnot. Many different cultures revere Venus because sometimes it's in the morning, sometimes it's in the evening. Many of these ancient mushroom cults they found would actually use Venus. Venus was considered to be good and evil. And that's why, because it's always been interesting to me that it was Lucifer, but Lucifer is bad but good, but bad but good. And it all makes sense when you realize that it's the evening star and the morning star, meaning that sometimes it precedes death or darkness, and sometimes it precedes light or morning. That simple realization that Venus can either be the light bringer or the darkness bringer is in its way, I don't know what, it's like a dualistic reality within itself that explains so much about why the ancients revered it as a god. So I think all these things are fascinating. I don't think we'll ever really know for sure which mushrooms were being used by which cultures, because but eventually we'll probably find some, in a tomb somewhere and identify them, but I'm sure there'll be psilocybin based because psilocybin mushrooms are worldwide. And universally, people have the same types of experiences. And this is why it's such an important thing, because if two people from different cultures, totally different backgrounds, can take the same substance and communicate on a level so profound that it needs not words, that's something that could be used to overcome boundaries. And that really just brings to mind an old saying. It was one of the, I believe it's a biblical parable, something about how, when God punished the men of the earth, he I don't know if it was during or before the flood or after or what, but that he created a barrier between men so they had no language, so they all spoke gibberish and they couldn't understand each other. They all spoke different languages. And a lot of people take that to mean that, different cultures sprang up around the world. Everybody has a different metaphor. But that just popped into my head as I said that, because I thought perhaps that was the time when the barriers came up between us and our psychic realizations, our connections to one another, when we lost our natural DMT producing abilities. Perhaps it's diminished to the point where it's only utilized at certain times. And I say DMT because it's the only endogenous psychedelic that we know of in the body. It's produced by the pineal gland. It's a very interesting compound that mimics death or a near-death experience. It also is almost identical to an alien abduction experience. It's also what the ancients, I believe, revered as the key to the underworld. And the mushroom contains DMT. So this drug is everywhere. If you want to call it a drug, I call it a compound, but I don't even know what to call it. It's an entheogen, if you want to go. I used to use that name, but some might call it God, or at least maybe the voice to God, or a language of God. Obviously not God itself, but the mushrooms themselves may be an entity, an aware entity. We don't understand how plants think, if they think. A lot of people think it's a lot of hooey that plants, have any feelings or thought at all. But there have been some interesting scientific studies to show that carrots have been shown to try to move out of the way. I can't remember exactly how they do it, but when they're under a microscope, when they're trying to slice it, I tried to find the link to it and I couldn't find it, but that they believe plants are aware of our intention. How far do you take it? You got to eat. You got to eat vegetables. You've got to. We're humans. We're living in this environment that we're not separate from. We're all part of. And taking mushrooms allows you to see that so much more clearly. I think that's the biggest, most important revelation I've had ever on psilocybin, was not just to know the connection between people in the world, or just to talk about it, or pretend it's real, but to actually see it and feel it. That's something amazing to me. Hope everybody gets to experience it sometime. So, what do we know? What about the Moai on Easter Island? What about these giant carvings? What about all these relief paintings with mushrooms, and the idea that Adam and Eve ate mushrooms for their knowledge? What does that mean for Christianity if that's true? If the tree of knowledge was really, mushrooms, like some of the old paintings. But who knows? These are 1,000-year-old paintings. We'll never know. It's just interesting to look back at history and see the significance. A lot of people talk about seeing, the significance of UFOs in history, and that aliens came and did this and this and this. But once you've had a psychedelic experience, you realize that you don't need aliens or telepathy or to communicate with Pleiadians to have experiences that are profound. And when you have a small group of people taking psychedelics like we do, sometimes you can have these connections with people and you can all work together and just have some amazing experiences. Can you imagine if 1,000 or 2,000 people were doing that together? So what kind of an experience would that be? It's just an interesting thought. Very well, maybe it was just for the high priests. I don't know. Depends on the culture, I guess. But I would imagine that, if anything, pharmaceutical industry would sure love to patent stuff, but they can't. It's natural. And I also had this really weird thought about phosphor when I was talking about phosphorus and Hesperus, because because phosphorus, being an element, is actually part of the molecule of psilocybin until it enters the body, and then it converts into psilocin. And the idea is that it's this phosphor group is taken off by an enzyme in your own body. And I had this weird proposition that maybe this phosphorus is used as a, maybe that's the root of why it's the glowing, you know, it's the energy center. I don't know. It's hard to explain. It's what sets psilocybin apart from other psychedelics. Is that phosphorus group, phosphorus atom. You know, I'm not a chemist. I try to follow these ideas of these benzene rings and serotoninogenic, you know, chemicals that are similar to serotonin, and to understand how they work, and to try to build them out of popsicle sticks, and, you know, understand these models and teach myself so I can really figure it out, because there's people like Alexander Shulgin who are just geniuses, you know, in their field, and they're big heroes, and deserve a lot of respect. So, hey bird. Birds are raiding my compost pile heavily. I've talked a lot about mushrooms lately, and this video ended up being a lot longer, so it will be in 2 parts. But sometimes when I make a video talking about psychedelics, I think it's too much for some people, but I feel like it needs to be said. So anyway, my thoughts are elsewhere now, and I better go.